All right, I'll just get started on this. So we're here for the simplifying local government and proposals and the Head Start in particular. And I'm going to pass on first of all to Alex just to walk through the presentation that we've got around this, which gives a bit of an explainer as to all the different bits of legislation that are facing us, and then we can move a bit more into what we're going to do about it. I know there's a lot of school thought, and we've got a few things underway. In particular, at the moment, there is the survey that's out. So this is a version of the Otago Mayoral Forum survey, but just recognising that we are sitting in a very different space with options, both the north and south. So we have altered that survey somewhat just to acknowledge our unique position. And some of the feedback that's starting to come through on that has been really interesting. So we will make sure we share that around councillors again, a new update on that very shortly, because I think it's going to be helpful. But for a start, I'll pass over to Mr. Palmer.
Okay, thank you very much. So we thought the purpose of this workshop was to get a common understanding of what simplifying local government and what the Head Start is about. Obviously, there's a lot of noise and a lot of communication on this, but it's really to make sure that we all understand that. And then to update on where the work is at across the two regions that we're part of. And then if we've got time to get into a discussion, what are the key issues and challenges for Waitaki in the process, and how we, really importantly, how we engage our communities in this process as well. So if we just turn to the slides, and I'll try to keep this brief. You've had opportunity to read this, but obviously before Christmas we had, as part of the tsunami of reform that we were told was heading our way, we had the announcement that the government wanted to simplify local government, and they launched a consultation on that, which included setting up essentially a committee of the mayors to replace regional councillors and to design a new system of local government within each region. Following consultation, the government then on the 5th of May announced the Head Start, which was a response to what they saw as the results of the consultation, which was a process really for those who are ready to submit their own proposals for local government reform within their regions or sub-regions. So if we go to the next slide, so this is where there's sometimes a little bit of a difference between what is in the policy documents and what's been announced. So the Head Start pathway is voluntary, fast-track route for councils, city, district and unitary, not regional councils, who are ready and willing to move. But for those who aren't, there's a backstop process, which I term as a bit of a mystery process at the moment, because we don't know what that's involved and how much say we will have in that. Some of the announcements would suggest that will be designed for those areas and regions from within Wellington, and some of the policy documents suggest that actually councils will still have a role within designing those arrangements. So it's a bit of an unknown, which is a risk in itself. There's also been the review of regional council functions that the government's undertaken quite rapidly, and they largely remain unchanged. And so it's envisaged that most of the current regional council functions, subject to the provisions of the reform of the RMA, will remain at a local level with whatever the new arrangements are within each region, so whatever the new unitary arrangements are. Whichever path we take, the government has said that regional councillors will be gone by 2028. So for those on the Head Start pathway, this will mean that those regional council functions will go to those new unitaries. But that for those who are not, they're still talking about a committee of mayors that will oversee the governance of those regional council functions. So the regional council organisations seem like they might still exist, but the elected body overseeing it seems that it won't exist. But the direction is clearly a direction of unitary authorities across the country, and working out what is the optimum arrangements for those in each region and sub-region. So if we move to the next slide. This sets out basically the timetables of the two different pathways to reform and unitarisation. So the Head Start pathway, quite rapid. We need to be able to be putting in a proposal by the 9th of August this year. And then there would be time after that for detailed design and then legislation to go through Parliament. Whereas the backstop process is a little more vague at the moment, but we had confirmation at our meetings with DIA on Friday that that change would not come in until 2031 in the elections there. But whichever pathway we go, it involves unitary local government replacing regional councils and territorial authorities. Sorry, John, do you want to?
Using mic, please.
Could you just repeat that, just that last bit you said?
So he was talking about the backstop process for when that would actually hit go on when the organisations to be stood up. They're talking 2031. So essentially the 2027, so the next, sorry, the 2028, it's a wee bit confusing here. 2028 is when the Head Start pathways are looking at aiming to have a new unitaries that are in that process stood up. And then the following elections, 2031, is when they'll be looking at the backstop processes, standing up anything else organisation-wise. Councillor Hopkins.
Alex, I'm just wondering, perhaps cynically, how much weight should we attach to any assertion from DIA, given how they were at odds with the Minister at the Rural and Provincial Conference in terms of timeframes and so on? And also the fact that they're disappearing. You've got this new Ministry of Cities, Environment, Regions and Towns taking over at the end of this month.
Yep.
So I mean, who's to say that between them, the government and the new ministry won't countermand anything and everything DIA is saying now?
There's certainly a bit of confused messaging. I think that's probably more, there's certainly a bit of confused messaging, and I think that's more of a governance answer than a, officer answer. Essentially, yes, there is confused conversations going between ministers and DIA. That's basically sitting on the Head Start pathway. Certainly the minister had very much sat in the space of do it or we'll do it to you. That has been pared back a wee bit from DIA, who are saying really this process is for those that are ready to go. But what they can't answer in that mix is why there's still an ability for those that are non-willing partners to be brought into that picture. And so that's where it does put a question mark over it. Around MCERT, the new CEO for that has been stood up, and obviously at some stage he'll have, I think it's 1st of July, budgets and things, and he will basically get the staff and the budgets of a number of different entities. He's been at a huge number of these meetings, and he is very much hearing firsthand exactly all the conversations going on. As to elections and whether things could change, that's an absolute option, but it's clear to say that there's been no strong messaging from anyone else, and I think silence is golden in that respect. And I think what you'd have to be careful to not put all your bets on the idea that this is going to go away, because I don't believe it is.
No, I agree with you. I think Labor knows it's a popular move, but the point I'm making is you've just said that the people who are going to be involved in the compulsory program, the backstop, they don't get to actually, or they don't become required to initiate a change until 2031. Now, effectively, that rewards resistance and opposition to what is, as Jonathan Salter said at the conference, a political process. The government wants this to happen, and it wants it to happen quickly, the current government. And all of a sudden, DIA are saying that the people who won't play ball get an extra 3 years to do that.
I don't think
it just doesn't make sense.
Sorry, I think rewards the absolute wrong way of looking at that, because the idea that a backstop process will stand up something that we may or may not even have a role in. I think when it comes to our community, the ability to actually patch together what works for our community is not guaranteed through the backstop process, and it is a lot more so, obviously not entirely, but a lot more so through the Head Start pathway, where we can go to the government with what we think is the outcome that we want for our community, noting the very, very short timeframes. But what's after that 9th of August space, we then will be working with. So basically the next few years will be around building how that could work and actually filling in the details. So I wouldn't say the backstop process is something that other councils that are dragging their feet are winning in, because I think that that's a massive risk to be taking. Alex, sorry.
Yeah, that's why I call the backstop is the mystery process at the moment, and certainly the messaging from ministers is if you don't participate in the Head Start and shape things for yourselves, then the backstop will do it to you and for you, which doesn't seem like a reward. And I'd say the 2031 date is the date that's been cited for stand up of the new arrangements. It's not that nothing happens between now and then. Certainly the messaging has been that the backstop process will be clarified, and after the election everyone will be in some form of process.
That's okay, Alex.
I think also, if my understanding is right, the DIA MCERT includes the DIA. It's just bringing a number of ministries together, but the DIA is part of that. So the people around that and what's currently being done isn't really going to disappear. It's just that it's got a wider brief, because the DIA, you go back a number of years, they dealt with quite different to what they're dealing with now between waters and reorganisation and stuff like that. So I think that's part of the reorganisation internally as well of central government. But I don't think DIA will go away in its role. It's just it'll be a branch of that wider ministry, I think.
It's a much more cross-ministry approach, which in theory should help the conversations and setting what this should look like. But we'll see what that works out like in practice. Back to you, Alex.
Okay. I think we'll move on to the next slide. So this is the Head Start entry requirements. I think I'm not going to read through all the list, but clearly it's not something any council can do on its own. It needs at least 2 territorial authorities to be able to do it. And a proposal needs to be put in that meets their criteria. Now, I think when we've been discussing this with DIA officials, it's clear that they're not expecting every proposal will perfectly meet all of these criteria, and that there might be trade-offs within there, but it needs to significantly show that it delivers on these criteria. So deliverability, i.e., it can be implemented within the timescale envisaged. It genuinely leads to simplification, that you get savings from economies of scale, that the new planning system with spatial planning is supported, but that local voice is maintained in there. So I think the criteria are quite broad. There was some further guidance issued on Friday. It gives a little bit more detail, but not much more detail. And I think it speaks to that, they're not expecting by the 9th of August very detailed proposals. They're expecting very high level proposals of how things might work.
Now, another thing that's not, I guess, clear in the assessment criteria, but has been clear in the messaging, has been around the catchment management as well. And the holding up is that needs to be solved within whatever I guess it's the deliverability thing. It needs to be solved within whatever processes are being put forward. Councillor Slack.
Watching the online meeting of the Canterbury Mayor Forum, I distinctly picked up from Timaru's mayor that they were looking, or maybe he was expressing his personal opinion, but I'd like your response on it, that they were looking at a minimum of 3 councils or 3 districts joining together, whilst I see 2 there. Or is that purely something that they might be thinking up there in Canterbury?
No, the guidance that was issued on Friday talked about regions where it's not suitable to have 1 unitary, and the potential to have 2 or 3 unitaries in a region at most. So I think that's what's feeding into that thinking there around the number of districts that might combine. So the suggestion is for a region like Canterbury, you would have a maximum of 3 unitaries set out in the guidance.
And just to expand on that a wee touch, the Canterbury position, while the messaging's possibly been not entirely confused, but a wee bit. They're looking for landing what a Canterbury-wide position is. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a one Canterbury-wide entity, because I think that it's relatively clear that that's not what the majority of the councils within the Canterbury region are looking for. But they want to make sure that whatever's put to government when it comes to what the setup of Canterbury could look like and the mix of things, that there's no one left behind and there's no grey areas. So looking like a Canterbury-wide approach for how that could be cut up, for want of a better term. So that's where that kind of comes into. So it's one, recognising that there's a few ones, and we're probably sitting on the outskirts where essentially which direction we go in or how we end up proceeding as a council ourselves isn't going to substantially change the overall outcome for what the look could be like, either looking north or looking south. But we need to understand where our decision points are. And so that's one thing I'm trying to get both from north and south is, when do they need to know, for instance, for us, when we're in or out, for them to feed us into their general picture as well, because that's going to have to feed into what our decision-making pathway looks like.
So just as highlighting here some of the key issues that are emerging that we'll need to think of as we go through this process, whether we're in Head Start or not. And I think the first one for us is around the disconnect between some of the reforms and how that impacts us, being particularly within two regions. So, spatial planning is one. So the legislation going through Parliament says that we need to be doing spatial planning for both our Canterbury part of our region and our Otago part of our region. And so if we landed on an arrangement that meant we weren't wholly in, we were wholly in one particular region, there's a disconnect in that process at the moment. Also, it doesn't connect that cleanly with local water done well. So we're now in a partnership with two other Otago councils and a Southland council. So how does this fit with that arrangement? And might we end up being part of a unitary that isn't part of Southern Waters? And how would that be worked through? So it's complex because we're part of two regions, and that's not really provided for much within the guidance at the moment. We are probably a little bit ahead in terms of working with our Otago colleagues, and there's good agreement in terms of a process for looking at the options across Otago. But obviously, we need to consider the options that involve Canterbury for us as well. And so we're working with South Canterbury councils and Canterbury as a whole. And so rightly, I think we're focused on making sure we've got we're gathering the right information, understanding community priorities, and exploring all the potential possibilities. And I know there's, I've seen some things out there that say, hey, you're already, looking one way or the other. And I can assure you that we're not. We're looking at what all the options are. And I think, the community voice in this is important. But it's challenging in terms of what is the right fit for us, which a lot of the TAs don't have. They clearly sit all within one region, and their choices are a bit more obvious in terms of what they're facing.
So we've already, I guess, and it's not in a formal agreement around council table, so we need to work out when we step into that. But at this stage, we have already formally stepped into the Otago Mayoral Forum's work, which is about standing up options, and that's looking at Otago wide, it's looking at the coastal Otago, inland Otago, and it's looking at sort of Southern Waters options, and there's a number of variations to that. Looking north, we've also stood up a body of work that we've agreed to already, which is basically looking at the Ashburton down to Waitaki, and a number of versions of what that could look like as well. So some of those versions are us in, us out, but it's really basically what we're trying to do in the mix of everything else we're going to stand up is try and get as much data around this conversation as we can, so we actually understand what some of the implications of any decision are. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, this is a question to both of you. I wonder if we've missed a key issue, namely the amount of the extent to which we should give consideration and emphasis to the government's concerns or desires to establish clear and effective catchment areas. Because it seems to me that management of the Waitaki River is going to be a really big ticket item issue. And logically, treating it as a single catchment would seem to me to make sense. Initially, I may be wrong. There may be arguments contradict that proposition, but as a first assumption, that seems to me to make sense. We don't have it here as a key issue, but if you accept that it is it something we have to factor into our optimum amalgamation solution?
I don't think it is missing from the conversation at all. I think it's been absolutely pride of place in that conversation. And you're right, it's very important and it's integral to the conversation. And when you have conversations, for instance, with Waimati and with Mackenzie, they talk about their river. And so we need to be really cognizant of that. That's part of the conversation we need to have because we understand the implications of us sort of stepping away from the Waitaki, but also we can't have a line down the middle of the Waitaki. There needs to be a catchment focus. So that's without a doubt got to be part of our conversations. And yeah, it's not missing from the conversation at all, Councillor Hopkins. Councillor McCone.
Yes, so as I understand it, the boundaries that are being spoken are the catchments of the watersheds from particular areas. So we're using the existing watersheds for the regional councils, is that correct?
We're not using any boundaries per se, like anything's up in the air and ready for discussion.
Okay.
I think if you talk to some of the regional councils, there's lots of views on how that could sit. And there is probably part of this conversation that we need to be mindful of that and it has been called in some of our responses already we've seen around the questionnaire have been on, does Waitaki as a whole make sense? And I think that's a conversation we need to have with the community as well, because it could look like that maybe it doesn't. But I don't want to have us leading with that as our point of view, because I think that's really damaging. I think that needs to be a bit of a community-led discussion. But there's certainly a conversation in there as to if you're looking after catchments, where does that leave some of the conversations?
Yeah, no, look, we're unique. We're the only one in the country that's split in half. And I think there's pluses and minuses on both sides. So I think everything's got to be options. Looking further ahead, where will that leave us as far as the administration side of things go for certain aspects? So it's hard.
It's hard. Sorry, Councillor Cowling.
Yeah, it's both a big opportunity, but also a threat where we sit with the ability to go both ways. I was just wondering if and the catchment thing, I actually agree with it. I think it does have to be a catchment thing. But that makes me wonder, have we invited Mackenzie and Waimati into the Otago discussion so that they've got the same choice that we've got?
Yes, we have. And there's letters out to them at the moment, as well as some further south councils from the Otago Mural Forum to ask if, not necessarily that they have to be part of it, but are they comfortable with us using their data as well to stand up options so that we know the full options, and they've all said they are comfortable with that. So we're just trying to gather as much information as we can, because I think that's important. But I guess the rider on that would be that it needs to be willing partners, and I think that may be where a couple of councils looking south may potentially come unstuck. But you know, that's just reading the tea leaves at the moment, if you will.
I was just going to say the catchment issue isn't unique to us. It's a challenge across the piece. If you think about other river catchments on the South Island, they go across many boundaries at the moment. So I think everyone's grappling with that. It's not formally part of the criteria, but it is a consideration in there. But somewhere there's going to have to be compromises on things because not everything fits neatly, and there might be other solutions. Anyway. Back to the presentation. So I think, the choices we have, before us. So shape the reform or have it shaped for us. This is quite clear. Do we want to lean into this and, with our community and give our, community a voice in, what the shape of future local government administration would be for this region? I'm going to skip through some of these quite quickly, just touch on them.
I guess just to expand, sorry, I know you're trying to race through things
Yeah.
quickly. Around the early engagement or the step back backstop, what I'm proposing at the moment, and we will have to work through when our decision making is happening, is that we do the work we need to right now to make sure we don't discount us from the Head Start option. And in that process, we can then work on how much we need and whether we're in a position at the end of that to make a decision on behalf of our community or not. And that's, I think, the debate for the day. But what I'd like to see in the process in which we are doing is basically stepping up what we need to do from between now and then to be able to hit those timeframes should we choose to.
So this feeds into that really in terms of that argument. So reform is probably happening, which plays to that point of, this has got to survive an election and coalition agreements, but we need to assume that it is happening. It hasn't got any legislation behind it at the moment, but the government seems pretty determined. So we need to think about that in considering whether we lean into that, Head Start process. If we move to the next slide. So this is saying, yes, because of that, we want to keep the door open to Head Start, and that's a decision that this council will need to make as to whether it enters Head Start or not. The work we're doing at the moment is to enable that, given the tight timeframes, enable that door to remain open so that you have the choice. And what we didn't want to do is get down, further down the road, a few weeks gone by, and you haven't got that choice as to whether you want to do it or not, because it requires quite a bit of work to be able to get into that Head Start process.
And one thing just to highlight too that the DIA have come across and said quite a bit is when it comes to things like us looking forward into our LTP, how we deal with spatial plans, while they are currently still very much sitting in the regional space, the willingness to help us and how we manage them through to whatever the future looks like is being offered to those stepping into the Head Start proposal and not for the others. So if there's any questions on how much we've got being thrown at us at the moment around reform and how we actually get a bit of support from central government, I think the only way we're going to access that would be fair to say they're being really clear that it would be through the Head Start process. So
the other thing covered on this slide is basically saying that this is a collaborative process, and that's what we've been working to do in both regions is establish collaborative processes that recognise that no one council can do this on their own, but also I think one of the challenges is with Head Start is that you can't actually determine what's right for a part of a region until you've worked out what is going to happen with the rest of the region. And if you look at, for example, Canterbury, until we've got an idea of what's going to happen around Greater Christchurch area and that arrangements, that determines what might be possible in the rest of Canterbury as well, and similarly within Otago to greater or lesser extent. So it needs to be collaborative. We don't need to solve everything now. So an outline proposal is just that needs to go in on the 9th of August, stating which councils are coming together, answering those core questions against the criteria, and how the proposal can create a functioning unitary authority, including how the treaty settlement arrangements carry across. But if that's supported by the government, the detailed design then comes later. So we would have time to do that detailed design. There's a lot that would need to be done. My experience in other settings when you're doing that detailed design, that is a quite intensive and lengthy process. And we'd need to be continuing to engage our communities in that process as well.
And just obviously recognising that should we step into the Head Start process, we have a just over 2-year window that's all going to happen, and so it will be intense to say the least.
So these next few slides are just to update on where we're at across the regions, and just to re-emphasise again, we're not working in one region, we're working across the 2 regions we're part of. So the Otago Mayoral Forum is slightly ahead, I'd say, at the moment in terms of the process that it's set up, but only by a matter of days, I guess, really. And that engagement is starting to happen. The community engagement started last week. And the work to commission the initial options analysis is progressing so that we can get some good data on what different options look like. And I think within those options for Otago, there's going to be some, sub-options within there, particularly when it involves ourselves. So if you look at the guidance, the default is to set up a region-wide unitary in each area. So we have to model that as the starting point and assess everything else against that. Well, clearly, if we're in 2 regions, we're not going to be part of 2 region-wide or unitary authorities. So in all of this, there are sub-options and little bits points of difference that will need to be considered. And then moving on to the Canterbury Mayoral Forum, there's a commitment in principle to take a Canterbury-wide approach to Head Start, and the CEs have been tasked with developing proposals that need to come back before the mayors within the next couple of weeks. And then obviously we're part of the South Canterbury discussion as well, that sits within that. So we've essentially got 3 work streams that we're working on at the moment. So the Otago-wide process, the South Canterbury process, and Canterbury-wide. What does that look like?
And we're trying to, as much as possible, get those that are working on these pieces of information working on the same assumptions and actually working together, so that we do find ourselves in a slightly better place than potentially we were with the Southern Waters or the Three Waters discussion, which is, when you're not really comparing apples with apples. So I think that's something we're really trying to push in this conversation, and it might be challenging because it looks like there's different organisations that are going to be heading each of the work programs. But one thing we're trying to feed back is we're all, as a grouping of councils, both North and South, paying for this expertise, and obviously ratepayers are paying for that, and they need to talk to each other. They need to be able to be things that can be critiqued and looked at across, and we can actually draw conclusions, because I think there's a real danger in us being given a whole lot of information and it doesn't actually correlate with each other, and our ability to make decisions on it is limited as a result. Councillor Hopkins.
Another question. My understanding is that it was flagged by representatives from Timaru that they are looking at a tripartite arrangement involving themselves, Mackenzie and Waimate, and that they have also engaged with or are having conversations with Ashburton. Has either Waimate, Mackenzie or Timaru formally or informally approached us?
Yes.
Are they talking to us too?
So I have given you guys different outlines on that across the way, and Rebecca and I were in Timaru last week. So we're very much part of that. It's not a 3 council, that's one option. So there was 5 councils that met in Timaru last week, to stand up that body of work, and that will be looking through options. And we're definitely part of that, because I think it's really important we are, and I'm open to us looking at options across the district, the 2 regions, because I think it's really important. And like I mentioned, where I can actually come back to councillors with a whole lot of data, and hopefully even early enough with our community. But obviously we're under the pump when it comes to timeframes, so there's going to have to be some elements of this conversation that are going to be happening without a lot of information, but we want to find out where our furthest back decision points can possibly be for us to be still included in the mix, but with us having as much information as humanly possible in that timeframe. Councillor McCone.
Yeah, there's a lot of information, a lot of thinking. I think page 10 says it all, where a voluntary pathway will lead to direction of travel. If we don't engage, a compulsory process settles the design of the reform and may have little or less local say over how it's shaped. I think that's the first thing you've got to remember, and that decision's got to be made by the 9th of August, according to the information here. I've 2 or 3 quick questions though. Do the geographical boundaries constrain the practical servicing boundaries? So, does geography come into that play as first group?
Can you just tease that out a little bit? I'm just trying to understand the question.
Well, does the likes of a physical boundary, likes of the Kakanui Mountains or the Waitaki River or somewhere else actually have a physical servicing boundary when it comes to, I suppose, providing infrastructure and those that are working in that infrastructure space?
It certainly can do. I think that's got to be part of our kind of conversations and mix. And some of these things, the physical boundaries are going to mean a lot more in how we work than others will do. But it is, I guess it's going to be part of it. And we'll move on in a wee bit to how we talk to the community about that, which is where I think we tease out some of that stuff.
Yeah. Second part of that is how influential will debt be with the backup option? Whether will that come into account if they start pushing us around?
We don't know.
No, that's how long
Like-
a piece of string, but yes.
I guess the whole debt picture, there's a lot of different mixes of debt, assets, a whole lot of things that are going to be stood up through part of this understanding what the options are. And I think that's, there's a lot of, councils are in a lot of different positions across the board, and there's questions of whether or not you can ring fence things, but obviously some of the gains that come from all working together are going to be limited by too much ring fencing going on all around the show. There's a huge amount at play. So that's why I think this information and the data underpinning all this is really important.
And third and last question, really, is population taken into account as opposed to, say, even area, or is it the numbers game on the page where we in? Because in a provincial district, we're at the mercy of an urban population.
I think it's a really good question, and DIA is certainly not giving a steer on that at all. Some of our different MPs have different takes on it, and concern about whether or not we join with a bigger amount to make it actually viable when it comes to the numbers actually helping the conversation. They're not coming out and saying numbers apart from things like the Canterbury maximum of 3 probably gives you a bit of an indication of what numbers they're looking at and what they see is your minimum viable option. And I think that there's probably some things we may be standing up data around which may not be minimum viable options, and we are trying to work with DIA and ministers to say we don't need to be going down any pathways that are never going to be viable in your eyes, but they are not giving much of a steer in that respect, really, are they?
It does say. Well, I presume it's DIA that have accepted, so it means this is actually, it's an option we put to them. They don't necessarily have to accept it. Is that the way I read it?
Yeah, the minister will.
So that comes to the point I was going to make is, this will be a political decision. Now, the numbers will be part of that, but ultimately there'll be other factors in play. They've already set out other criteria. And so, it's going to be interesting looking at the different options as to how much weight is put to other things. So I know from some of the engagement we've had already that there are some parts of our community and other communities that want to see a strong urban unitary and for a strong rural unitary, and for urban areas not to be teamed up with rural areas. I don't know whether we can make that stack up financially. I'd suspect it is probably less attractive financially than putting it urban and rural areas together. But we've got to remember at the end of the day, this will be a political decision that's based on the information we put forward, but based on other things as well.
Sven, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think Alex just answered the rural urban question I had, but I do also wonder how much of the lessons we've learned from Southern Waters in terms of how you deal with some of the detail has been discussed at that point, just noting that at the moment we're just looking at the outline. But before you choose a partner, you do need to have a bit of an idea about what people think about the detail. Because it's ideally you'd sort the whole lot out at once, but obviously it's never going to happen in 3 months.
I'd say that's part of the challenge that we have at the moment, to do a full detailed business case analysis of a particular option. I think you're probably looking at a 9-12 month process to really interrogate that properly, and we clearly haven't got that. So we're going to have some high level analysis that hopefully will provide enough information to give an initial decision and steer.
Yeah, I think the biggest level of discomfort in this whole mix is the fact that if we step into the Head Start pathway, which I think has benefits for us designing our future as a community and working out how that could work, we have to take a real leap into a direction and choose a line, and that has implications in itself, and we may not understand them as well as we could do. So that's, I think, probably playing on all of our minds at the moment. Deputy Ryan, did you have your hand up? No.
No, but I do have a question. Has there been any more detail come through on, I guess, what a lot of the questioning that I'm getting from the community beyond just, I guess, what options are on the table is around what the representation looks like and what influence they can have in terms of, I guess the bigger picture. And being at RMP, and those discussions, there are all the bigger questions as well in terms of Māori awards and what that looks like if one council has supported that through a referendum to go forward and another that they are potentially looking at joining has not. And so there's a lot to be worked out in that space. But has there been any more guidance come through from DIA in terms of, I guess what they're looking for there in the proposal, and I guess not having when we're talking about simplifying local government, not having every proposal having a different form of, what representation looks like?
I think the question, whenever we have asked questions about that or for, further insight into things, I've said, well, we want you to put forward what you think will work and we'll assess it based on that. So they're very much saying, hey, this has got to be part of those 5 criteria that you respond to in your application. And you need to tell us how local voice is protected through whatever your future looks like. So there needs to be a high level thinking about that from us. But obviously the detail part of that would probably fall into the next part. But we need to have a plan, and that's what they're expecting from us rather than giving us any guidance on. See?
Yeah, so given it's largely political process and it's we've sort of got to tell a story. We've also got to tell a story to our neighbours that we want to ideally partner with, and starting to think like a regional council as well as the territorial authority. Is there an opportunity to put in alongside that outline some of the preferences for the detail?
I think they're open to us putting as much as we want to. Like when we sort of said to them, are we looking at a 10-page proposal or a 100-page proposal for a start, just to get an idea of what level of detail they're looking for? They said it without a doubt shouldn't be sitting at 100 pages. But the more you put in there, the more prescribed you're becoming, which if you get it approved is probably helpful. But it also probably takes some of your options off the table if you're trying to dig in and find more information. So it's probably finding a balance there as to how light you can go to get something across so that you've actually got time to spend making that, building what that looks like.
I'd probably add to that, getting to that level of detail in the time we've got is going to be challenging. Getting everyone to agree to that level of detail will be even more challenging. So I think realistically in the time we've got, if we're going to put something in, it's going to be, broad and directional. So some of the things we've been talking about is that, in any sort of unitary arrangement in rural South Island, having high levels of, devolution within that to local communities, so you can get the economies of scale of a large unitary, but keep that local decision making on local facilities and services that are needed without eroding some of that, efficiency that you get. That's at a principal level. How that works in practical level, that's going to be the bit to determine where the line is drawn in terms of whether you decide things at a unitary level or at a local community board level.
I think it's fair to say some of the conversations have said things like that the regional conversations, whether they have the same boundaries is another question, may still remain active. And one of the conversations had at the Canterbury Mayoral Forum was around the ability for 2 unitaries or 2 or more unitaries to still share services, or especially around that kind of regional council function. But where that sat, so rather than it sat over the top and it has driven what decisions each council can make, now looking at it being more embedded so that it is responding to the unitary rather than the other way around. So kind of just flipping the balance on that, because I think that's probably caused some of the problems where there's been too many decisions makers at play.
Yeah, it's all I think it's all quite exciting really, but very, although albeit rushed, but so the Canterbury mayors will have some proposals in a couple of weeks from the CEs. Is there a similar time frame yet for the Otago one? Because it would be shortly after that, I'd imagine the public will be able to see some slightly more formed up ideas to comment on.
Yeah, I haven't got my timetable in front of me, but yeah, within a few number of weeks, looking at some analysis of different options for Otago, that we'll be able to get in front of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jim?
Just touching on that matter of debt, which I think is going to be a key issue for community, or a key concern for the community. Again, at the rural and provincial sector meeting, Mr. Bishop did say that debt would be all sorted out. Well, that would be in the 2028 legislation. My guess is we would be prudent to assume that debt will be ring fenced, because this proposal will sunder, and the community support that it currently enjoys, I believe, will disappear if Council A is told it's going to be responsible for Council B's debts. That's not going to fly in my view.
I think that it's too premature to count anything out of the mix, because what's being built by the Head Start kind of council groupings is what the backstop looks like. So they will be teasing that out, and that will be the level of detail. Like, it can probably be something that we indicate potentially as part of what we're dealing with, but I think that will come out in the detailed discussion. Take to your point that it will be important, but it'll be important for every council across the country. But what government's trying to do is, I guess get those economies of scale working. And so the idea of every council ring fencing all of their assets and all their debt is probably going to create an absolute extra line of intricacy to this when they're trying to simplify. So it may not be palatable. I don't know that, but I guess that's the part of the conversation that we need to tease out.
So the point I was going to raise, which you just touched upon, is like debt is only one part of the equation, because you've got assets as well. So if you ring fence debt, you're going to say you're going to ring fence assets, so other communities, won't benefit from those assets. And what are the implications of that? And how complicated are you going to make it, particularly for those poor accountants? Those poor accountants we feel sorry for, and having to work out what gets costed where. It'd be an impossible job, and you might do it for a time period, but I couldn't imagine that would persist for a long time. And there'd be some real disadvantage if you just ring fenced all debt, all assets. You'd be stripping out economies of scale quite quickly.
Tim?
I guess one of the criteria there I see is there's got to be cost savings, which is quite hard to come by from just purely amalgamating things. Is the fact that we'll no longer straddle two regional councils, that's going to be a big cost saving? Is that the sort of thing that we can put forward in our outline, or does that come later?
I think that's something we could put forward in the outline. I don't know how big a cost saving it's really going to be for us, but clearly be some cost saving to that. I'd say my experience of these things, though, is that the cost savings of amalgamation are never as great as you'd hope they'd be, and the costs of amalgamating are always higher than you hope they'd be. And I think just amalgamating alone is not actually going to make local government in this country financially sustainable. It needs some more fundamental transformation. So I think that's not going to come in this initial proposal stage, but it's certainly something I'm discussing with my colleagues about. How do we use this as an opportunity to change the system and not just bring a whole load of services together to continue operating in a very traditional way?
Frans?
Yeah, so we've got this survey out, but I suppose the key question is, what else are we going to do with community consultation? And if we are, then what's the plan and the schedule for that? As everybody pointed out, we got bugger all time to do it in. So if we're going to do something like that, I suppose we're going to get moving soon.
Yep, no, fair call. Let's step into that. So we are looking at standing up, and it's probably looking at being 4 different community meetings. So a bit like some of the community meetings we held last month, which will be probably Otamatata, Palmerston, Wamaru, and Napara are probably the 4 that we're looking at. So we are looking at, I don't want them to be, because this is a council setup, this is more than just council. This is about community and identity. And so we're looking at panel meetings, which is going to bring some different perspectives to play so that we can actually tease out what this does mean to a lot of different groups. And so just stepping up what those panels look like, and they are being worked on right now. So where the timeframes that I've sort of given us, the next sort of 2 weeks, we're wanting to try and do them by the end of the month if possible, or it might go into the first week of the next month sort of thing. So we're trying to get as many as we can in there without it being absolute overload. I think we need to probably take a little bit of learnings from our last set of community meetings, that we probably need a day or two, or maybe 2 days in between things, because we don't want to drive everyone into the ground. I think these are important, and more councillors and staff and things that we can have at these conversations to sort of work out what we're feeding into whatever proposal we might come up with. Needs to mean we need to make this a viable thing. So we don't want to be going, hey, there's 4 days in a row, there's 4 community meetings, bang, 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 because that would be horrendous. So looking at doing the 3 community meetings, and that was sort of based on some of the conversations we've had, and then that'll build into Wamaru being the final place that we do. So by then we've probably got a good handle on what questions are out there, what things we're not able to answer that maybe we need to do a bit more work on. And then we will look at live streaming or streaming, whether it's live streaming or just streaming, I'm not sure, the one in Wamaru, so that we can have a wider audience with that one as well, because this has big implications for our community. What I'd like to see, and we're still got to work on whether or not this is a viability, so this is probably a part a wee bit, is outside at the end of those meetings, whether we can do something a bit like the questionnaire we've got out at the moment, to see if it sort of changed views, or maybe we re-put that questionnaire out after that body of meetings, so that we can see if things have changed based on just having a bit more information at play. But I do think that that questionnaire is still a really good basis for us to get an idea of where people are thinking and what's going on. But if we can build into that a little bit more knowledge and understanding of not just the, hey, I am Otago through and through, or I'm Canterbury through and through, thank you very much, we go no other way, but build into it a bit of an understanding of what it's actually going to mean around the catchment, what it's going to mean about how things are created, where our communities of interest lie, all that kind of stuff. So if we can tease that out, so looking at members of the farming community, business community, some council people, and obviously yourselves all in the audience too, so we can try and tease out a whole lot of viewpoints so people can really understand the full intricacies involved.
I like what I'm hearing, just particularly on that last part, and you're not going to like it, but that's all right. I just wonder, in the mayoral forums that you are part of, whether that last survey or question, as you've just pointed out, if that could be done simultaneously across the other districts as well. I actually, in my mind, can build a picture as where the majority of people's wishes would be, as in how they would like to see a region formed. I know it will take a bit of setting up. IT will be a challenge, but I think that would, well, it nearly would be a referendum.
I understand what you're saying, and I guess in the Canterbury wide, that wasn't like the idea of a questionnaire or something like that, like we've stepped into in the Otago Mural Forum sense, wasn't something that people felt strongly was where we were ready to go yet. I think there was felt that there needed to be a whole lot more information in that conversation first. So I guess that we've got a role and we don't have a role, because you can only put ideas to the table, and if they're picked up on, they're picked up on. But the reason we sort of set our particular questionnaire outside of the Otago Mural Forum on our own platform with our own lot of questions was just because none of us wanted it to appear that we're just looking in one direction, because we're certainly not. And just that what could be asked in all of our Otago Mural Forum different councils versus what we asked needed to look different, because they just weren't dealing with the same level of intricacies that we were.
Take all that on board, but my key point was that was after all the community meetings. So a lot more data, a lot more knowledge, a lot more answers from the panels that people have heard by then, and that might have helped to form a more educated or learned opinion, rather than now, which is basically a vote from the heart. So that's why I stressed the point after the community consultation.
No, fair call, and I can certainly try and work on that as a plan. And I do think, for certain we can do something after the community meetings for us, so we can understand what the more informed, if you will, approach will be, but can also talk to the Canterbury based councils about whether they're willing to pick up that kind of way forward as well. John.
again, I agree with Franz and yourself. I like what I'm hearing. Along with everything else that's going on at the moment, while the legislation is not there for this to be compulsory, there's a pretty big stick that if you don't do it, the direction is going to be set before we get that far. So, and I think sitting around this table, this is our last chance to actually set the direction for the district. I don't think we've got too many choices. So if it takes more and above and beyond, well, let's get on and do it because we owe that to everybody to get it done. Yeah, there's not much more we can say than that. I actually was not aware that there was a consultancy document out there. And so perhaps we need to push that along too, because I'm not quite sure that the district is aware of just exactly what it involves in this decision that's going to be made in the next 6 weeks. And on top of that, if there is a document out there, keep it simple. We don't want to know too much. We just want to know their views. And hopefully everybody respects it for what it is.
Yeah, I think it could do with being pushed more. I guess I've been probably feeling like a little bit that too. I'm feeling like we need to try and push it at the right time. And so I think it's a really helpful tool at the moment, but I think that when we really want to push it as an organisation is after the community meeting, so that we've got a bit more information to underpin it, recognising that if we're looking at the end of the month for these community meetings, the chances of us having anything back from either north or south around our options is probably unlikely, would be my guess. Rebecca.
Thank you. You touched on it earlier, actually, I guess, just about the learnings from our last round of community meetings. And I just wanted to emphasise, I think, the importance of being able to, whether it's live streaming or recordings of these meetings, and perhaps not even just the Oamaru one, because I guess there will be different questions and different concerns for the different areas that these meetings are being held in, and how we are, you know, people are busy. Everyone's got a lot going on at the moment, and the more that we can do to help make this information accessible and help make people understand it, because even, you know, if we're to Franz's point, I guess, about getting feedback from those meetings afterwards, or whatever that looks like, the more that people can be involved in understanding the process and as soon as possible, given the timelines, is going to be so important. So I would really like us to really look at what we're doing in that space going forward.
Take your point on that. My biggest concern would be the technology options at each of the smaller venues, and things would make some of it more difficult than others. And so, you know, I think you do a bit of damage when you have, one where people can't hear what the hell's going on, essentially. And so, you know, I think we need to do it well. And if we can't do it well, then I think we're best to leave it to one venue. So I'm picking up what you're saying, and we'll see what the level of technology is at each space we're looking at, and whether or not it's a viable option to do them across the board, because I am getting what you're saying. John, did you have your... No, sorry, it was Jim, must have been, sorry.
I'm just thinking about Franz's comments about the meetings and data and so on, and also Rebecca's about the comments she's getting from people in the community. I think before we have the 4 public meetings, we probably need to work out formally or informally a few PIPs, which are preferred initial positions, if you see what I mean. By which I mean, we are going to be asked questions about debt, about assets, about Maori seats. And, well, I suspect we will. If not Maori seats, then allocation of positions for Ngāi representatives as per the Regional Council in Christchurch. So I think we need to have, I don't think we need to say this is something that we absolutely will insist on and we won't change our position at all. But I think we need to signal that we've given these matters some thought, and our initial position is here's what it is, whatever it is, but it will be influenced and amended by feedback from the community. So I just think there's probably about between 5 and 10 things that we need to have some kind of answer, because otherwise we're just telling people choose a dance partner, identify some geographical boundaries.
See, I probably disagree with your take on that.
Sorry?
I disagree with your take on that. I think the more information we get out there, the more informed our public is.
Yes.
I think us going out there with this is our initial thoughts is wrong because we have so many options. And I think we need to be listening to our communities quite strongly on this because things like, does Waitaki as a whole continue to exist in the local government sense at the end of all this? I'm not going to be the one without talking to my community that puts a line through my community at all. And so when you're talking about we want a preferential kind of idea, no, I think we need to listen to our community and then we go away with that and we look at what's important and we look at what the outcome is. When it comes to things like Māori seats, I don't believe that there's a call for that to be on the table at the moment. None of our councils that we're in communication with have those seats. So I don't think that's a helpful conversation because I think what that does is actually puts a sideline conversation at play and gets people upset. That might be the intention of this and it's not. So I think that we've got to be really careful when it comes to what's our position on that, is that there is no position on that and there's no call for that right at the moment. So we leave that be. I think we can either stir this up as much as we choose to, or we can go out to our community and say, here's a whole lot of information. This is what we think is important. And that is things like our catchment and how we deal with it. How do we deal with our local voice? How do we make sure that, you know, people are feeling a community of interest outside of that? And that's a conversation for us to have when we go to these meetings as a council. But I personally do not believe putting a personal position on the table makes for an open community meeting. What it does is it creates something for people to fight against, and I don't think that's the right thing to do.
Sorry, I don't disagree with anything you've said. I was picking up on comments from other members. Rebecca said she's been asked by people about Maori seats. Well, you did say that. You specifically mentioned them.
Can I just respond to that? So my comment there was that was raised at the Rural and Provincial Conference, not that it's been raised with something with me. And so
well,
it was just
I'm
a discussion around if we're talking about simplifying local government, but each of these regions is then discussing different representation models, what that looks like.
No,
that wasn't a question that I'd fielded.
That's fine. I took what you said to mean that these were engagements you'd had with local people. All I was saying was, if we just say on everything we have no position, what are we going to do about debt? That's up to you. What are we going to do about assets? That's up to you. I mean, we're entitled to, I believe people will need to get some sense in some particular detailed areas, not the generalities you've talked about. They're definitely up to the community. But in terms of some of the issues that have been mentioned here, the key issues, I think it would be helpful for us to offer an informed preference. That's all.
It's helpful for us to offer some detail and information so that we can actually inform that discussion. But I think a preference is different.
All right.
Councillor Cowles.
Yeah, and I think we've got to be mindful here. If we, I'm the same. I don't want to go out with anything because I'm learning as I go as well. This is unprecedented. It's something that I don't have the answers to it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend. I'm going to learn as I go what it means. But we've got to go out to our community with what we have and as much information as possible, gather what those thoughts and those things are, and then work out what that might mean. But even in this initial process, we can't answer what will happen to debt because we don't know what the outcome is. And so having anything preconceived at the moment, for me, I just feel, we need to learn alongside as this process is a very fast moving process. I guess the only difference is that, part of our role is sitting here taking all of that information on, whereas some people will take on what's particularly passionate to themselves.
All right, Councillor McCone and then Councillor Thowning and then Councillor Slake.
Yeah, I concur with what yourselves and Mr. Cowles have said. I've been to one of these and there's pamphlets there that are issued out by the DIA, I presume, heads up, that specifies, generalises what this presentation's been. Perhaps we put one of those in every mailbox. Perhaps we don't. Perhaps we talk to our friends at the Oamaru Mail and say they'll give us a nice free page and put it out there so everybody can read it. But yeah, we've got to get that out there. No, it didn't miss a beat, did he? But the point being, this, as I said earlier, it's the last chance as a district council to set the direction for the next one. It's 40 years ago, they changed the direction. Now they're doing it again. So what you set now is going to be probably sitting in concrete for the next 40 or 50 years till something else comes along. So we've got to give everybody the opportunity to do it. And I don't think, and as Brent said, we're all still learning. We're not quite sure what the rules are. There's no legislation, but there is direction and there is a stick to give us that direction. So let's get everybody out there informed. Everybody, for once, as much as I hate consultation and that word, and I'd put that in the right context, but for once, this is very important that you do actually stand up and do it. Otherwise, you're going to miss out.
Absolutely right. See.
Yeah, I concur with John there. I think this is of the scale of 1989 all over again, isn't it? So I think one thing that we definitely learned out of that is that what is almost 40 years later, and all the people this side of the Waitaki River and up the Hacker that ended up in the Canterbury region are still unhappy about that. So probably what we can learn is that communities of interest is really important. We can be given all the other criteria and how it practically works from our point of view as a council in terms of, populations and votes and debt and, a lot of the technical stuff. But I think the communities of interest will be what will need to come through very strongly as well.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's probably where I have a bit of fear, because I think that communities' interest can also be a real mixed bag. And I think how we land out of that, because there's always going to be someone with whatever proposal we put forward that doesn't feel a community of interest to whatever the outcome is for them. So yeah, it's a hugely important part, and I think we need to listen to it, but I am really worried about how you solve that.
Yes, and actually I did have a question in that. The second, or the end survey that we put out after we've had the discussions, could that have the respondents say what ward they're in? Because I suspect that what ward you're in has a pretty big influence on what the overall communities of interest idea will be from that ward.
Yeah, the current one we've got out there does have that on it too. But yeah, I think it's really important because it might help sort of break down whether or not we're all thinking the same or we're not thinking the same. Frans.
Certainly interesting conversation. A couple of things I want to pick up. First of all, on Councillor Hopkins' remarks, I think the answer to that is preparedness by the panel. We're going to find out what the community actually wants to know and what their interests are, what the questions are going to be put to the panel. And I would imagine there's a fair bit of work to be done with staff just to make sure that the panel is prepared for that in terms of data so they can provide answers. So yeah, to me, it is all about preparedness. Second, on the advertisement in the Oamaru Mail, it's really not as crazy as you think. Yes, it will cost a bit of money, but how simple. In the end, I would still like to see, and picking up a bit on what Councillor Thelninger said there, is I still would like to know actually what our people within Waitaki, preferably outside of that, actually prefer, as in with dancing partners. And one way of doing this, you put a map of the South Island in the Oamaru Mail and get people to put a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever they want to do. And from that, you can get a pretty good idea, as in where people's preferences are, without us providing a preference, which I totally agree we should not provide a preference. Failing that Oamaru Mail scenario, I'm looking right at the corner here. Can't be too hard at the community meetings to actually put a pamphlet out there and let people take that home, or even in the meeting itself put there. I think we need to know where do our people's preference are. I'm actually quite aghast, but maybe that's me because I come from another planet or another part of the world, but that this hasn't been covered by some sort of referendum, to be honest. I think it is such a huge change to the system. And I actually like what is being proposed. I believe it will benefit the country, but I'm amazed that this isn't a choice that the people of New Zealand can make individually as part of, well, maybe they can in part of an election, but from the feedback that I've seen and heard from the major political parties, they pretty well seem to be favouring this across the whole parliament. So, yeah. That's where what I just want to say.
Do you have anything else on your presentation?
Couple of slides there, just to round things off. So there's a couple of other things on here just to round it off that might prompt a few other discussions. So Baj's is key takeaways. So one thing to remember is nothing is. I think there was a slide before that, wasn't there? Was there a slide before that?
I think there was.
There's a slide before that, but I think we've skipped over, sorry. Yeah, so nothing is changing immediately. This is a policy announcement rather than legislation, and we need to bear that in mind. So we've got to do some work now, and I doubt it'll be wasted, but there's a risk of that. And the government's made it clear that this is going to be funded by councils and their ratepayers. There's not any government funding to put into this process. Government legislation not expected until 2027 after the election and coalition agreements. We're still uncertain about this backstop process, so just reminding that's a risk. But if the changes were agreed, depending on what track we're on, they're a number of years away. But in terms of that first one, November 2028, I should imagine that will come around pretty quickly. And then final slide I have here is a few other key takeaways that there are big risks to our communities if we do nothing. So if we do nothing, then our community, in terms of the process that's set up at the moment, doesn't get to have their say on where they think things should be going, or probably doesn't, based on the announcements we've had. It's really complicated for us as we're potentially part of 3 processes, and as a small organisation, that's going to stretch us in terms of dealing with that. But we need to invest in all those 3 processes well. The catchment criteria and split between 2 regions means, and we've started to touch on this, there may be options that we need to consider that involve splitting the district up. And I think this is about working out what's the best outcome for our communities, and not saying, hey, we need to preserve Waitaki district in some form or other. If the best outcome involves parts of the district going different ways, we need to be open to that.
I guess just to tease out on that one, because that was a conversation that I tried to have with DIA, because there is a risk there. If we have a proposal, we think that maybe that's the best way forward, where one portion of that mix falls into the Head Start process, and if the other portion isn't ready, they fall into the backstop process, and we have 3 years in limbo of a council that's being dismantled on one part and is being held together to be potentially dismantled 3 years down the track, and the rating implications and a whole lot goes with that. That's really messy for us, and I've asked DIA to be to think on that one, because I think we're going to need potentially some support, because the answer was, oh sweet, well you just have part of your community that would be in the Head Start process and part in the backstop. But when you start to unpack what that actually does mean on the ground, that's horrific. So yeah.
And I suspect the answer we get back is, you'll need to work that out in your transition arrangements as to how that would work. And it would probably mean some sort of arrangement whereby, that part of the district remained with that, new unitary until the other, parts of the region are sorted. But it's less than ideal, but it's just something we'd probably have to work through. I've put on here just to remind, I started with this, but I'll remind, the decision making rests with each council. So whilst we've, started processes through the different mayoral fora, the mayoral fora have, the power to lead, but ultimately each council will need to decide where it lands on this, and, whatever partnership arrangements we're in, including mayoral fora, they haven't got the decision making authority on that. So what this council does rests with, around this table in a formal council meeting.
And just to confirm, because that whole of Canterbury is more the whole of Canterbury looking at what the options for Canterbury could be. And it's not so much sitting in the whole of Canterbury unitary authority option. Like, so just it's a bit of a nuance there, but it's important. Franz and then Sven.
It is a question, and I doubt any person here can answer it, but I'm just really curious. I am somewhat confused how the forming of unitary organizations on a voluntary basis seems to be able to be done so quickly. However, the backstop process can take till 2031, and I'm struggling with that. Well, I've just been actually thinking about it, just wonder, and I don't know whether you can answer this, or perhaps that's a question you can put to one of your forums that you're in. Is this a legal thing where district councils can basically volunteer to join, but oh boy, if you are forced by government, it is a very drawn out process. Again, it's just something I'm curious about.
It's certainly something that the forums I've been part of have been questioning a lot, because I think, you know, that 3-month window, or what's now more 2-month window, is really, really tight. And then there is such a long gap to the other ones for those of us that might be able to get our pieces in a line between that period. At the moment, there's no avenue, but there's a few different discussions at play. One being that those that enter into the Head Start process but aren't successful, being able to continue to work on, and whether or not there's a hybrid process in there. And I guess that hybrid process could look the same either way. They are hearing that and feeding that back to the conversation, but they're certainly not offering us any guarantees on that at the moment. So that's all we know.
Can I add to this? I think this is about, as well about how the policy of the government has evolved. So I think when they were first thinking of Head Start, we know that there are some regions where councils have been discussing for a while about having different arrangements. They've done a lot of thinking about it. But when it was announced and there was this, and if you don't do this, we'll do it to you, suddenly everyone's looking at how do they, shape their own destiny. So I think when they originally started off on this route, they thought there might be 4 or 5 parts of the country that were already in discussions that would come forward. But the manner in which it was announced meant that every part of the country is considering whether they should be in the Head Start or not. The truth is, you can't put together a very well thought through proposal in 3 months. It's going to be very headline, and there'll be a lot of detail. So there are going to be over a year's worth of work after that, if you get approval to proceed, to actually sort out the detail of that.
Sorry.
Back to the point about the potential of different parts of the district being involved in the Head Start versus the backstop. When I was reading through the Natural Environment Bill and Planning Bill at Christmas time, there was a provision in there which probably foreshadowed a lot of this, where I think off the top of my head, where a region didn't have a plan, it was like the new plan, it was subject to its old plan. So I think if that sort of thinking is going to carry over from the resource management space into the simplifying local government space, it might be a just hold tight type situation, and which would be a bit messy. But I'd imagine that's probably where it would go.
I think part of this overall picture and how it lands for us, no matter which direction we look in, is us being really clear what our decision-making pathways are, because some of our decisions, well, probably any of our decisions, have an implication on others. And so I think to that effect, it's if we're looking at landing any early decisions that look like they're confusing matters, is there other conversations that can be stepped up faster in order to compensate? I don't know. There's a lot so I think, where we end up landing with our dates for making decisions needs to leave time in there for us to be clearly part of the conversations that fall out of that. That doesn't sound very clear, I get that. Right, is there any other comments or questions anyone has? I guess just moving forward, because there is a bit of commentary out there that we're going to do what we want. I just want to be really clear that's not the intention. Is we're out there having a huge number of conversations. What we're not doing and what we are seeing in a number of councils around us is the jumping to conclusions, but I think it's a lot easier for the simplified kind of answers to come out of some of the neighbouring councils that we have. And it's certainly not a simpler picture for us. And so I think, you know, we really do recognise that as a council, and we want to work on our community to get the best outcome. And that does not mean coming out nice and early with a position to start jamming down people's throats, because I don't think that's helpful. I think what we need to do is tease out what this could mean for us, where the opportunities lie, because that's a huge part of this. Recognising Councillor Felding sort of, you know, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and it absolutely is. We could get a better deal out of this for our community and have a council that, or whatever unitary authority that might look like, that works better for this community, and that's what we should be aiming for, and might be able to bring more to our community in that process. So I think we need to be really open to learning from those around us, taking on feedback from people, and then at some stage we're going to have to come back into the room here and make a decision. I think that's probably us for now. So for those listening and staff and everyone helping out in this piece of work, because there's a huge amount of work going on in the background, just want to thank you and thank all the councillors, and particularly Deputy Mayor Ryan, who's joining me in a lot of the Christchurch, or you know, the northern based meetings. There's a huge workload that I'm asking for a number of my councillors in that space, also in the regional spatial planning space. There's other councillors that are having to step up. Yeah, we're certainly hitting these conversations feet first, and we're trying to get the best outcomes for our community. With that, we'll leave it there.